I want to just walk forward all the different concepts that John talked about from the start to the finish, all the way through every bit of deployment. So let's just show you real quick in Visual Studio. This is a full Visual Studio solution. It uses some of the architectural patterns of Onion architecture. We see that core library there, very thin, but this is also a Blazor WebAssembly application. And I wanted to just kind of highlight some of the artifacts that we tend to put into the application for the purpose of making it easier for deployment. Like John said, everything is a package once you get to deployments. And so if something is going to be in the package, then it has to be in source control, because at the tail end of a successful integration build, we're actually going to create those packages, which I'll show you. And so you see two different scripts, which I'll follow up on at the end. One is to check the version of the software, or check the version that this particular application thinks it is, to make sure that the version that spun up and started up at the end of a deployment is actually the version that we intended to deploy. It's one of the checks to make sure we have a good, successful deployment. Also, we have another PowerShell script that just calls the health check endpoint. And in .NET, one of the really popular libraries is the health check library, where you can write all kinds of interesting things to make sure that the application is healthy. And so, in Azure on the free tier, it's really easy to accidentally leave a free tier running, or not change. Once you upgrade to premium, you forget to change it to 64-bit process. And so here, our code just asserts, yep, we are running a 64-bit. And then, of course, in database, a health check to make sure that, guess what? The connection string actually got configured properly upon deployment. We can actually reach the SQL Server database. And so just little tiny bits of code run, and we can ask at any time if the application is healthy. And I'll show you that at the appropriate step. So this is the Visual Studio solution. And if we were just to kind of share the GitHub repository, I gave you the URL for that GitHub repository there. And you can see that we have our Azure Pipelines.yaml file for that configuration, and we have our .octopus. Now, as a bonus, I'm not going to show you that today, but as a bonus, we also have our .github directory. So if you want to use this with GitHub Actions, you know what? Sample configuration is right there in that folder that you can snag as well. But if you're not familiar, actually, I'll show you this one first. If you're not familiar with Azure Pipelines.yaml, then one of the key steps that is super important is when you actually call over to Octopus Deploy to create the release. And I'm going to show you visually what that looks like, but you literally use this task provided by Octopus. And one of the key things to make this compatible with automated testing, which I'll also show you, is this setting, deployment progress true. And then all of the logs that are available in Octopus Deploy also get streamed over and are stored in Azure Pipelines as well, so that you can see all the logs aggregated together. All right, so before we exit source control, the .octopus folder, this is where the entirety of the configuration for your deployment project is in Git. And the process, I'm just showing you one of the steps here, where we are literally going to call that check version.ps1 file that I showed you in Visual Studio. And it's coming over as part of one of the release candidate packages. And it's a PowerShell file. And we put in some parameters, that is the URL to the actual running application and what version that we are expecting to see. And then there we go.